Hello everyone. Wow. I have something very important to say about the George Floyd trial. Today, both sides rested, and I think the defense missed a huge opportunity to help their client. And I'm going to tell you what it was. When I watched the video, I noticed one thing that was very interesting. I saw George Floyd having a massive panic attack. He was under extreme anxiety and stress. From the moment cops came over to his car, banged on his door, they had guns drawn in his face with a pointer at the end of it. I don't know if it was shining on him, but this is a very stressful situation for anybody. I mean, that's a threat of deadly force over an alleged passing of a fake bill. I mean, this is a massive escalation. So the police in this case just messed up on all levels. It was just terrible what happened here from the start. Now, if you see what happened here, from the time that they had the guns drawn, they took him out of the car, then when they holstered the guns, you can see the anxiety level dramatically drops. You can see Floyd actually thanking one of the cops for de-escalating. The guns were no longer there, he was in handcuffs, he was sitting down, the anxiety level was dropping. And what do? Of course, they have to escalate again. They arrest him. They didn't have to do that. You can see the anxiety level just go through the roof. He was foaming from his mouth, and they start to accuse him of drugs. I mean, you could just see where this was going. He knew that he was in a lot of trouble, and he was just freaking out. That's what was happening here. He was having a massive panic attack. You can clearly see it. The signs were there. When he went into the car, he said he was claustrophobic. That's a sign of a panic attack. He says he can't breathe. People that have panic attacks feel that they can't breathe. You can see all the signs of a massive panic attack. Okay? Now this is a psychological issue. Psychological. Okay? In this case, the defense rested their case, they hung their hat on a drug overdose. This was the cornerstone of their defense. And I think this was a huge mistake, because what that basically does is, it blames the victim for his own death. I mean, he was being held down by 3 cops with his stomach facing the ground, his chest facing the ground, handcuffed, restricting his breathing, and then he slowly fades and becomes unresponsive. It's a case of a man who has his oxygen cut off. This is not the scenario of a drug overdose. A drug overdose means he's going to go into a sleep and not awaken. In this case, he was responsive. You could see the anxiety. He was struggling. This is not what happens when somebody is suffering from a drug overdose. That's not the scenario. And they hung their hat on this. They brought as many experts as they can. They try to rebut everything they can with the experts that were brought from the prosecution. I think this was a mistake. I think what they should have done, which is what a lot of criminal defense lawyers do, is try to blame someone else. Put the blame on somebody else for what happened. Like in a murder case where you see their client on trial, they can say, well, that other guy was at the scene. He had a motive. He did it, not my client. And I think what the defense should have done here is put the blame on someone else. Put the blame on those other 2 cops. Because keep in mind, they initiated the contact, shoved guns in his face, okay, which is a threat of deadly force, which can cause massive anxiety in someone who's being subjected to that. They started that. And you know what else they did from that point? He was handcuffed. That causes a lot of anxiety. And then he was being forced to go into the car. And there is when his anxiety went to the roof. He said he's claustrophobic, he was struggling, he did not want to go in that car. Now keep in mind, throughout these events, from the time when the 2 cops approached him to when they were trying to get him into the car, his client didn't even arrive at the scene yet. He wasn't even there. He didn't even come there yet. By the time he got there, he didn't know the circumstances of the events that took place. He was merely assisting them in the arrest. He was trying to collar the guy and get him into the car. And that's what the defense can say. And here's something very ironic. At the beginning of the trial, it was actually the prosecution that wanted to bring a forensic psychiatrist to testify. And the defense didn't want it because the prosecution was trying to say that he wasn't resisting, he was having anxiety. And his intention was not to resist, it was the anxiety that was doing it. So the defense was trying to say all along that he was resisting, and therefore the police were justified. He was resisting, he didn't want to just go into the car, and they can blame him for that. And I think the defense should have realized that this is what they should do. They should take the psychological aspect of the case and try to use that to their defense. And this would have been their best defense, and I'm going to tell you why. Because using the drug overdose, it can actually make the jury angry. It's like they escalated, they pointed guns at this guy, shoved him into a car, and then held him down for over 9 minutes where he couldn't even breathe and he was begging for his life, and now you're blaming his death on drugs, which you can't prove. So it may even make the jury angrier. I think what the defense should have done was they should have shifted the blame to these two cops and say, look, my client wasn't even there. They used a threat of deadly force against him for something that was very minor, that wasn't proven. They escalated it by arresting him, which they shouldn't have done. And then all my client did was come late to the party. I mean, he just came there later to assist them in what they were doing. And he may not have even known what was going on. It's just a cop assisting another cop to make an arrest. Now you can ask the question, well, can a panic attack cause death? Well, no, but it may be able to cause a heart attack. The cardiologist was on the stand and he said, well, it was lack of oxygen. And the pulmonologist said it was lack of oxygen. But that's their field. You see, they're in the field of cardiology, pulmonology, but not in the field of the psychological aspect. They're not in the field of psychiatry. And that forensic psychiatrist actually may have really helped the defense if they would have taken that route. And here's why I say this. So here's the question, can it cause death? Experts say no. Can it cause a heart attack? Well, this is very interesting. Harvard Medical School, 2012, published a health letter. And that health letter said, it's unclear why heart disease and anxiety are connected and whether anxiety can cause heart attacks. Generalized anxiety disorder is associated with surges of stress hormone cortisol and an outpouring of other chemicals in the fight or flight response. They mentioned fight or flight in this trial before. That may in turn make heart attacks and other cardiac events more likely. So although it's not definitive, it's saying that it may make it more likely. That could be put in the juror's mind as reasonable doubt. Because if it may make it more likely, then maybe that was the cause. And it's very interesting because they didn't bring the brain into this part of the equation. They brought the heart, the breathing, right? The tactics of arrests. So many experts and so much testimony pertaining to that. But what about the brain itself? They brought up the anoxic shock. That they did bring up. And they spoke about it, but they didn't talk about the psychological aspect. Keep in mind, this escalation and the arrest, everything that took place, this went on for 11 minutes before his client was even at the scene. And rather than the defense blaming the victim for his own demise, which is not really a good thing to do in the juror's eyes, like I said, it may make the jury angry, side with the victim. Say, look, my client just showed up much later on. It was the two cops that first came to the scene which triggered this massive panic attack that he had that caused the heart attack. That's what they can say. And they can cite the Harvard Medical School paper. They could possibly bring a witness, like the prosecution wanted to bring, but they didn't do so. They could have subpoenaed the other two cops to testify that first came at the scene. They didn't do that. Although it may not have helped them anyway because they may have pled the fifth anyway. But you have the video. It shows the timeline of events that took place. They didn't interview the store manager. They could have asked him, what was his psychological state? Focus on the psychological. This way they wouldn't try to victimize the victim to say, hey, he was a drug addict, he overdosed. They could have shifted the blame on the other two police. This is what criminal defense lawyers do. Shift the blame to someone else. Say, look, they started this. They escalated. They arrested. He was having a massive panic attack. That's what caused the heart attack. My client came later. He was just assisting them. See what I'm trying to say? Shift the blame. but he didn't do it. Why? There was no shift of blame to the other two. Like I said, he came so much later, and he's the first one to go on trial, obviously, because he had his knee on his neck, and that was the most visual that you got as far as suppression of his oxygen. But there were other two as well. One was on his back, the other one was holding his legs down, and combined he couldn't do anything to get enough oxygen to survive. Do I think that was the cause of death? Yes, I do. The three of them pressing him down, not allowing him to get the oxygen he needed, or one of them try to help him and tell the other cops to get off and put him on the side to physically do something, was the cause of it. Yes, I believe that. However, if there is doubt that could be put in the juror's mind, like I mentioned, this Harvard Medical School study, that maybe that's what the reason was. Maybe someone on the jury is suffering from anxiety, or knows someone that is, or has a family member that is, and they understand the situation of what he went through. The blame shift can go on someone else and say, look, that the anxiety attack happened prior to my client arriving at the scene. That could be a good defense. That could be reasonable doubt. Why didn't they do it? Very interesting. Now, do I think they should have just set aside the drug overdose as part of their defense? No. They could have made it part of their defense as a contributing factor, but don't hang their hat on it. Don't say that's the sole reason, that that's what caused it. I would like to know what you think about this. Your thoughts about possibly using the psychological aspect as their defense? Please leave your comments, please subscribe, please like up this video, and thank you for tuning in.